want to welcome you all to ITS Webcast Elite Security Intelligence for Smarter Vulnerability Management. We are an elite ServiceNow partner specialized in security operations and asset management. We are highly certified in these areas, and our customers have given us a 4.5 out of 5. We've been a ServiceNow partner for the last 8 years and strive to provide our customers with great outcomes. So in the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be reviewing a couple of things. First, I am really excited to introduce your speakers for today. Then I'll talk briefly about the partnership between ITS, Recorded Future, and ServiceNow. And then ServiceNow is going to talk about how we can move from vulnerability management to vulnerability response. And then Recorded Future will come in and talk about threat-based patching prioritization. And then the two vendors will talk together about how the products work together. So today I am really excited to introduce our main speakers for today, Syra and Wendy. So Syra is from ServiceNow. She is a manager of the solution consulting space at ServiceNow for IT transformation, risk, and security. And then Wendy is from Recorded Future and a senior partner architect. Then you've got myself, India, and I am from ITS and I'm the partner manager here. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, ITS is a specialized partner in security operations. And earlier this year, ServiceNow introduced us to a company called Recorded Future. So what exactly is Recorded Future and what are they all about? They are the world's largest collector of threat intelligence. They are a company with over 100 million in annual recurring revenue and have 850 customers. They're growing at over 50% per year. A competitive differentiator is that their transparency of sources and how they produce risk rules and risk scores on observables. Not only do they have a fantastic UI, but they also have a robust API, which we are going to discuss today. Their data inside of ServiceNow's vulnerability response module creates a truly better together story and helps our joint customers make more informed decisions on vulnerability prioritization, which helps reduce risk. ITS is always striving to bring our customers to the next level of maturity, and bringing Recorded Future alongside our ServiceNow partnership just made sense. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to Syra from ServiceNow, and she's going to lead us into our vulnerability discussion. Syra, take it away.
Thanks, India. Really excited to be here today. Here at ServiceNow, we believe that everyone wants a great experience, and for most organizations and ServiceNow customers, your C-suite really knows that experiences do matter. I think a lot of us are probably facing this today with our remote work and the transformation to the new normal. These experiences matter, and great experiences drive fierce customer loyalty and powerful employee engagement. Across industries around the world, a lot of organizations are really looking for ways to digitally transform themselves into modern enterprises so that they can remain competitive and accomplish their business goals in this new economy. The challenge is that with most of these modern enterprises, work is highly unstructured, and it's really happening within disparate systems of record. Departments have their own data systems, multiple sources of record that are stored really on various legacy technologies, and work is happening in silos, which lowers productivity and really leads to a diminished user experience. So using ServiceNow and the Now platform, customers can excel at digitizing work that flows throughout a company or across multiple functions and bring that together into a unified experience. That's really why we call the Now platform and ServiceNow the platform of platforms for business solutions and all workflows across the enterprise. Our unique differentiation is really providing you with a single platform that shares a common data model, one architecture, as well as many built-in powerful capabilities, like the ability to build cross-enterprise workflows, leverage a single CMDB and asset repository, have a unified enterprise service management experience, as well as some of the newer areas that launch most of our customers into the modern enterprise. So things like leveraging machine learning, artificial intelligence, and predictive analytics. And what can be really powerful, especially with the remote workforce, is being able to enable these services on a mobile app and have conversational interfaces. let's talk a little bit more about how ServiceNow can help your organization really digitally transform your traditional vulnerability management program into what we call a vulnerability response program. So most organizations that we deal with here at ServiceNow have the same pain points when it comes to managing vulnerabilities. Your organization may have gone out and invested in a vulnerability scanner. So for example, a Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7, or Tripwire. You probably also have some program around pen testing and managing those pen test results, potentially even doing web app scans as part of your DevOps lifecycle. And really, the problem definition comes down to the difficulty it is in managing those actual findings from your vulnerability scan solutions. So it's hard for customers to really manage the amount of data that's coming out of those scanners in a spreadsheet. They don't know who to assign what. They also don't know how to reduce their risk exposure overall across the enterprise because they don't know if they're working on the right thing that's risk prioritized or the wrong thing, like maybe something that's on a back office server that's eventually going to be decommissioned. Why are we spending our time working on that? And more importantly, even if we are doing a great job at prioritizing those vulnerability scan results, we don't really know what to patch first and how to efficiently hand over to the IT operations teams so that they can go out and actually perform the remediation of those vulnerabilities. And so we're seeing that these key pain points really drive customers to move away from vulnerability management and to start focusing on how ServiceNow can help power a vulnerability response program. Now, if your organization is already a ServiceNow customer and you're using us from an ITSM perspective, you're probably used to hearing the terms and the capabilities around incident management, problem management, and change management. These are really your ITIL-based processes that are running the IT operations department. And from a change perspective, your organization may already be using change management to focus on their monthly patch cadence. So for example, actually responding to Patch Tuesday from Microsoft. They may also be receiving changes that are manually created inbound to go out and actually carry out an emergency change request, whether it's applying a patch to a critical system that has a high level or a high risk vulnerability on it, or whether they're actually going out and looking at things from a proactive perspective, where maybe I have a 0 day that I've been alerted to, and I need to go and actually identify where that 0 day could potentially introduce risk to the organization. So what's interesting is your ITSM team and the change team, they're using ServiceNow today. And typically, if you don't have a solution like ServiceNow's vulnerability management module, your information security and your vulnerability team is potentially dealing with a different technology platform. They could be doing things in spreadsheets. And so if you can imagine, if we unify the experience across security and IT and really bring that vulnerability team onto ServiceNow, now they can start to focus on what the vulnerability scan results look like. Do I have the appropriate SLAs in place to actually make sure work is getting done in a timely fashion? And do I have a better way of automatically assigning and prioritizing those vulnerabilities so that whether it's security or IT, my teams know what they need to focus on first? So let's talk a little bit about what this process actually looks like. So today, I had mentioned earlier, you may already be using Tenable, Qualys, or Rapid7 as your vulnerability scanner, or maybe you went ahead and developed something in-house. We've actually built purpose-built connectors with our technology partners to pull in those scan results so that now you're logging into ServiceNow to actually take a look at what those vulnerabilities across your enterprise look like. And we're automatically prioritizing those vulnerabilities. And prioritization means different things to different organizations. You can actually use our risk calculator to customize and configure what risk and prioritization means to you. So are you looking at this through the lens of CVSS score, or the QID severity, for example, or the Tenable plugin ID severity, or does Rapid7 score really matter to what you're looking at? But then in addition to that, because most organizations are leveraging ServiceNow CMDB, now they can get really powerful business context as well about the asset on which that vulnerability was found on. And using that, we can make some decisions on how to prioritize which vulnerabilities get fixed first. And then more importantly, I may be looking at stale data. So how do I know that the vulnerabilities that have been risk prioritized have the most up-to-date intelligence, letting me know what's actually exploitable within my organization? And that's where ServiceNow powers with intelligence providers like Recorded Future to help with that prioritization. Once we've prioritized, now we empower folks in your organization, whether they're asset owners or whether they're part of the ops team, to actually decide if we need to file an exception. So maybe I cannot patch for whatever reason, and I need to be able to track that. Or do I automatically hook into my change management program and create a change request, requesting the ops team to go out and apply a patch that I'm even providing them guidance on? So we can actually feed in solutions like Microsoft Security Resource Center to help with patch prioritization as well. And with coordinated change planning, now that IT team can go out and make sure that they're focusing on things like conflict resolution, that they're actually applying these changes within the appropriate time windows. And this is all facilitated via a closed loop fulfillment feedback cycle. So what I mean by that is once the IT ops team goes out and applies a patch, we can actually go and run a validation scan, hooking in again to your vulnerability scanner to actually confirm that the vulnerabilities were in fact remediated. The same concept applies from a configuration compliance perspective as well. So you can actually ingest configuration drift scan results and manage your remediation process around those. So if I'm going to leave you with one message before I hand this off to Wendy, it's that looking at your vulnerability scans in a spreadsheet is just simply not enough. Stop using spreadsheets. Avoid interrupting your patch cycle with the IT ops team, and have a way for you to operationalize a handover between security and IT. And really, this can only be easily facilitated when you have a single platform that gives you the visibility across both teams to ensure seamless handoff. And with that, Wendy, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about how we can leverage intelligence to make better decisions when prioritizing.
Great. Thanks, Syra, and thanks, India, for the introduction earlier. Let's consider why a vulnerability response strategy should include threat intelligence in the first place. In 2019, the National Vulnerability Database disclosed over 17,000 vulnerabilities, and of those, 57% were classified as high or critical. So how does an analyst prioritize intelligently when the haystack continues to grow, but it doesn't seem like the needle within the haystack grows along with it? By understanding the external threat of exploitation, your patch management cycle can now include current risk assigned to the CVEs present in your environment, and we really believe that internal awareness of risk is not enough. I imagine there are from various levels of familiarity with Recorded Future on the call, so I always like to level set. Recorded Future is a threat intelligence data provider. We gather data from a variety of sources on the web, which you can see on the left-hand side of the slide. Those sources being open, closed, technical, and proprietary. This data is collected in a two-pronged approach using both machines for the speed and scalability of data collection, and then also humans for validation and improved accuracy of that data. This data is then structured, organized, and delivered to be consumed in a variety of ways. We have a UI, we have custom analyst-driven reports, and we also have an extensible API as well. Today we'll focus on that last method, that big red box there, the last method of consumption, but really arguably the most important being through our API and our integrations with strategic partners like ServiceNow and ITS. Recorded Future likes to take the approach of what data do you want and where do you want that data to live. Lastly, over 50% of our clients are using an integration today, And that really is because we want our data to complement current workflows, to augment what folks are currently doing today, rather than disrupt and require that swivel chair action to continue. So the biggest takeaway here from my portion is that Record a Future is not the F word. F stands for feed in this presentation. So we're not simply a feed, we are that threat intelligence data provider, gathering data from various sources and helping provide external context on top of internal telemetry data. Our data can be used within a variety of different business units and teams within the organization. The use cases we present today will include solutions for the vulnerability management team. But for us, data is only as great as it can be operationalized to save time within all the business units, but specifically within the vulnerability management lifecycle and overall helping to reduce risk to the organization. So what Record a Future data are we actually pulling into ServiceNow? It's always important to understand how we structure and organize the data because it is the same data that a client would see in our UI that's now being pumped programmatically into ServiceNow vulnerability response. We have a notion of entities. Think of an entity as a CVE, an IP, a domain, a hash. We provide curated intelligence gathered from all those various sources we talked about earlier, the open, the closed, the technical, for each type of entity in our system. This info is represented on something we call an intelligence card, which you see on the right-hand side of your screen. We score entities and provide direct evidence to help analysts answer the question of why is this bad, really, why should I care? In the patching world, why do I prioritize this patch over the other 100 I have? The scores you'll see within our UI, but again, let's talk about how our data looks in ServiceNow. The scores you'll see within ServiceNow are reflective of the current external risk Record a Future has seen for that entity. We layer this data on top of the CVEs present inside ServiceNow, and Record a Future is able to provide the threat or severity of exploitation. Because of all the different various sources we gather from, we can be that early warning system for clients and provide data that they may not have seen before or their scanner hasn't seen as well. Syra talked about the staleness of data that seems to plague the vulnerability management cycle. And because all the data we put in ServiceNow is always real time, it really does help better prioritize and understand what is currently the most risky. Now, where we've seen wins for the client in particular is with Record a Future's risk score now being added as a critical third component in the ServiceNow risk score calculator. We're actually the only vendor, the only threat intelligence vendor that does integrate or have a component within this risk score out of the box. Prior to our integration, the calculator had two components, being asset criticality from the CMDB and the vulnerability severity, which we don't believe shows the complete picture of risk. Now, Record a Future adds that third critical component being the external risk or threat of exploitation that we've seen from any of our sources, but say from the dark web or a foreign language forum. Joint clients tell us that this new calculator setup and approach helps them better prioritize and prioritize with confidence, knowing that multiple data angles, not just internal but external, are now added into the calculator. So how would this look in a joint solution? Our data will come into multiple tables within ServiceNow, being the NBD, the vulnerable item table, the third party, but arguably the most important is how our data can be customized within that risk score calculator, which we'll get into a little bit later. This truly is a better together story for us. While we'd like to think that one tool or offering can solve all security concerns, and of course that would be great if that tool existed, the reality is that it can't, which is why our partnerships really matter. The addition of Record a Future data within vulnerability response allows for a threat-based patching prioritization strategy. We incorporate the real-time external risk evidence and enrichment assigned to CVEs as seen across the web to help provide that comprehensive approach to patching. And again, this is all inside ServiceNow. So lastly, don't take Syra's word, don't take my word for it. What you see here on the slide are the results from a joint client analysis of life before and after Recorded Future was integrated into ServiceNow. Here basically is the haystack needle analogy from earlier, but in real life. You can see the green, there are thousands of disclosed vulnerabilities, but only a small portion of those are actually critical and actually in a client's environment. Even a smaller number of those, our research shows us that it's about 5.5% are actually exploited in the wild. Recorded Future reduces the haystack, but also allows the teams to prioritize on vulnerabilities that matter for reducing risk that is specific to them. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Syra to start the demo portion.
Thanks, Wendy. So if you have either seen or not seen ServiceNow before, this may look familiar to you. So in ServiceNow, we've really purpose-built dashboards based on the end user persona of who's interacting with the system. So from a security perspective, whether it's your CISO trying to understand how the operational metrics are trending, or if you're logging in as somebody who's accountable for vulnerabilities on systems you're responsible for, you might actually see a dashboard that looks something like this. So this is what we call our vulnerability remediation dashboard. This is actually out of the box, along with many other dashboards, depending on who's interacting with the system. And on this dashboard, what I'm looking at is essentially the scan results that have been imported from my vulnerability scan platform that we've automatically prioritized and assigned to stakeholders so that they can take action on them. So you'll see, for example, that I'm looking at the vulnerabilities broken down by their risk rating here. I can actually define on a 5-point scale, or this is also configurable, depending on what my organization thinks is deemed to be critical, high, medium, or low. When I think of a critical level vulnerability, I like to think of some of the crisis vulnerabilities that we've seen in the past, so things like Blue Keep or WannaCry, and being able to automatically have a program around how we respond to that crisis level vulnerability is critical. So I've not only marked that vulnerability as being critical, but I can actually engage my operational teams to go out and test patches to fix that vulnerability. I can manage an SLA that maybe only has a 7-day time period to make sure that all the different teams are responding and prioritizing to that crisis level vulnerability, and ultimately reduce my risk to actually having some exposure. I can also come into this dashboard and take a look at my vulnerabilities that have been assigned to me by their SLA. So whether or not I've missed an SLA can help drive some of the behaviors around prioritizing work appropriately. And if I want to actually drill into what's specifically assigned to me, so maybe I'm part of my desktop team, maybe I'm responsible for owning the vulnerabilities on systems that support my finance BU, for example, I'm interested in really taking action on what's in my work queue. And so this dashboard is my work queue where I'm able to look at the vulnerabilities and when they're due. I can also take a look at those vulnerabilities. Again, they've been risk ranked according to criticality, and also understand and identify which vulnerabilities or set of vulnerabilities has already missed the SLA assigned to it. And I can go ahead and drill into these dashboards. And so I'm automatically taken to what we call a vulnerable item, which is part of a larger vulnerability group. And so the concept of vulnerability groups in ServiceNow is really critical, because if you can imagine, the spreadsheet output from a scanner might potentially have tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities on it. We need a way to easily slice and dice that set of vulnerabilities so that it can get consumed by various teams that need to take action on it. And so these vulnerability groups, and more specifically the rules that help you build these groups, are going to really help your organization digest that massive amount of vulnerabilities that you're responding to. So now this is my landing page from where I'm actually going to take action on a set of vulnerabilities that I'm responsible for remediating. You'll see that a risk score has automatically been calculated for the set of vulnerabilities on systems that I own. And if I scroll down, this actually shows me that there's about 10 vulnerabilities on multiple systems across the organization. We pulled in our business context from our CMDB, and we've also correlated this with threat intelligence information to help us drive that calculation of an overall risk score. So each one of these vulnerabilities has its own risk score assigned to it, but then also as a group, we're normalizing all of those scores up to a single risk score so that it's easy for me to prioritize my efforts. I'm able to track how many of those vulnerabilities have open exception requests against them, or how many have been granted an exception request. So let's say, for example, I'm not able to remediate a vulnerability on my Tomcat server. I can actually come up here and using these buttons up top, I'm able to request an exception and trigger ServiceNow workflow to engage a key stakeholder that's going to grant me this exception request. Now that exception request could be time bound, could also be something that's indefinite. And I'm going to define why I think I need that exception request. So is it because we risk accepted this vulnerability on this system? Is it because it's a false positive? Or is it possible that maybe we already have a mitigating control in place and I want to be able to track the exceptions that have been granted against that mitigating control, and even use other parts of ServiceNow like ServiceNow's governance, risk, and compliance suite to actually test the efficacy of that control. On the other hand, I may actually decide that I need to create a change request because I'm going to hand over these vulnerabilities to my IT ops team to go out and actually focus on how they're going to apply patches or make configuration changes to remediate that vulnerability. If I want to investigate any one of these further, I can actually drill into that individual vulnerable item to show me that single CVE, and again, that could be a QID if you're using Qualys, could be Rapid7 or Tenable or Tripwire, could even be your proprietary homegrown vulnerability scanner because we can ingest those scan results as well through our API. But I'm able to look at the CVE, investigate it further, and actually take a look at the National Vulnerability Database or the NVD entry for that particular CVE. So I can look at the CVSS score, for example, how exploitable that vulnerability is. I'm also able to see when the SLA is actually due. So what is that remediation target? What's that due date that I need to make sure that I hit from a remediation perspective? If I scroll down, I'm able to take a look at some additional scoring information. And I can actually come over here, and if I decide that this is something that's critical because of my risk score being so high, so it's calculated as a 95, I'm able to actually hand this over to my SOC or my CERT so that they can actually be aware and informed of this vulnerability as well. So we can hook directly into a workflow that kicks off a notification and a security incident for my SOC or for my CERT. And if I scroll down, I'm actually interested now in how intelligence has been utilized automatically from Recorded Future to help calculate that overall risk rating of 95. So Wendy, can you tell us a little bit more about how Recorded Future comes into play here?
Yes, thank you. The Recorded Future data you see inside this part of the ServiceNow Vulnerability Response module layers external threat risk assigned to vulnerabilities in your environment. This data is fed in programmatically, like we've been saying, so ServiceNow analysts can remain in vulnerability response, but now use threat-based data to better prioritize their patching. We understand not all teams patch and prioritize in the same way, which is why Recorded Future data allows for complete customization within the risk score calculator. We break out our risk rule into both a threat score and a vuln score, which are subscores of the overall risk score you see on the left. The threat score will speak to the threat of exploitation, while the vulnerability score looks at the vulnerability severity. Teams can use either component of the score within their calculator weightings. Risk rules will explain why is this bad and why should you care. On the Record of Future Vulnerability Enrichment tab, now we start to show the risk evidence string you need to validate patching of X over Y. As Syra hovers over, you can see the different risk rules and that transparent evidence that India had talked about as a differentiating factor of Record of Future data, again, directly within the ServiceNow view. So you'd have to ask the question, what's important to your team? Is it a vulnerability with exploits in the wild? Is it a vulnerability where there's been an observed exploit tool or development in the wild? Or maybe it's a vulnerability where the NVD hasn't disclosed any details on a CVE or the CVSS score hasn't been created yet. Whatever the answer may be for your specific team, that specific type of risk can now be customized into the calculator weightings as well. In summary, using threat intelligence in your vulnerability response strategy allows teams to see the whole complete picture of risk. So we believe both the internal and external view. We're super proud of our partnership with ServiceNow and the client-centric services that ITS can provide in our Better Together trio. So with that, I'll hand it over back to India for some closing remarks.
Thanks so much, Wendy, and Syra, thank you as well. Really appreciate you guys walking through this process. I know this partnership is extremely valuable, especially in times like today where there is an increased opportunity for exploitation, especially where folks are working remotely, and being able to score and prioritize is really more important than ever. So if you do want to continue this conversation, feel free to reach out. Here in the bottom, we've got a little link for you to follow, www.itsdelivers.com /next-steps. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and the rest of your weekend. Thank you guys so much for joining.